Good morning, good evening, good day, greetings and salutations with a helping of welcome to the Safe Room featuring security side quests and happy Monday. And we're joined today by myself, who is Tristan Watty, and Russ. How's it going, Russ?
Good. How are you doing? Apparently not a good day for you. You're willing to skip yourself and go right to me. So
yeah,
must be that kind of day.
Yeah, it's one of those days. Well, I was working backwards in our presentation. So, you see what I did there, right? So 10 points to them and 10 points to us. See? I have to keep it going. I don't know how Yoda does it, but welcome in and thank you for everybody joining in for the first time. Because if this is your first time, let us do this properly the first way. So I am Tristan Watty. I am coming to you from the professional services team as a senior security consultant who helps customers accelerate their journey to a cloud, particularly the AWS one, in a secure manner, fashion, form, and way. And I'm joined by the mysterious, the marvelous, the magnificent, who is going to name himself right now.
I'm Russ. I come from the customer incident response team, so I help customers contain, mitigate, and remediate their security incidents.
Yes, and as always, thank you, Ari, for joining in, and always kudos to producer Jeff. Yes. So, as we like to start off with, is the question of where's everyone from? Where is everybody tuning in? Listening, viewing. I'm trying to think of other ways. Getting a RSS feed, something along those lines, right?
Perceiving us digitally, if you will.
Digitally from across the interwebs. So that's our first question. But as always, we like to have a follow-up question. And today is the same type of questioning when we come to choices. So, would you rather have a personal soundtrack that plays whatever music fits your current situation, but everyone can hear it, or be able to summon any item you need, but it disappears after 24 hours? So, choices. Russ, answers?
Yeah, this is a tough one, because I think that music would really, especially if it fits the situation, that's awesome. I would probably get maybe into more fights, I guess, get beaten up more, because I'd just be amped, like, yeah. But being able to summon stuff for 24 hours is so useful. But music would be so funny. I gotta go with music, but that was a really tough one.
Yeah, I would have to go with music too. Just based on the songs that would be randomly playing throughout the day. So if you had a day in the life and you had music, just picking up your coffee, just imagine it's just any type of music playing, right? The good old, I would say, anime openings for me, or switching to a good old rap album for no reason, right? It's like, okay, we're going to code, and it's like, like, wait, what's going on? And hello, Frozen. Thank you for joining in. So feel free, put your answers in the chat. But we like to digress. We like to go off the rails. So we'll try and rein it back in because we're going to talk about a great topic, a funny topic, a topic which is of interest. But Russ, before we get into that, got to give a little bit of a teaser. Where did we come from last week?
Last week, our episode was on AWS Verified Access, also called AVA or AVA. And our episode was building an advanced zero trust infinity castle, which was topical. Still is, making breaking records, doing all sorts of things. This week's episode does not need to. You do not need to have watched our previous episode to understand what's going on today. Today is our "You've Merely Adopted the Command Line" episode. And so today we're going to go over some things that you need to know for AWS CLI, which is something that I think most people definitely take some time to get used to and mess around compared to the console. And maybe some of our more advanced users will pick up some new tricks or refreshers on some good old stuff.
Yeah, and that's what we like to have. And since we just came off that question, so if we're going to speak about the overview, just randomly just play some dance pop music, right? Something like that. But I digress because the overview bullets. I was going to go for an epic guitar riff or something like that, but we're talking about you merely adopted the command line. So the overview of this is, hey, let's talk about the evolution of AWS console to the CLI within a consultant's or just a practitioner's career, because you weren't just born in the command line. You were kind of molded by it over the course of your career, because you start out, hey, I need some visualizations. And then you go from there. See, Russ, I can transition in it. First, you go there. But the second part is, hey, how do I do security operations via the command line? That's an important part, right? So you say, hey, I want to use the console, but then you kind of realize as you go into your security journey that, hey, when you see how other security professionals are kind of leveraging AWS CLI as one of the potential pieces to do critical security operations, you start thinking, why are they doing that? Well, it's the precision at a scale that they tend to have, because what we're trying to get into is that workflow approach. We're trying to say, hey, the security console could add another vector that you have to account for. So can we just get rid of it? That's often a question that individuals ask themselves. Well, we're here to kind of talk about it, to speak about it, and all those other words in between. Because when it comes to your security automation, your foundations, you feel in charge of your security journey. So just a couple more voices. This is like 43 more minutes of it. So,
I love it.
Yeah, we got to do a bunch of themed episodes with voices for October, Cybersecurity Awareness Month. So that'd be interesting.
That's a good point.
Yes, because the session focuses on establishing a robust security automation framework. That's where this session is going today, as well as kind of not paying attention to the voices that we're making as we're speaking about it. But it overall gets to the point of, hey, all these professionals are taking this approach to leveraging the command line, to implementing it from an operational standpoint. So now, how do we avoid the pitfalls that they took? Right? Because that is the progression of, one, not only your own organizational journey, but everyone's, because everybody's looking to optimize, to better secure, right? So when you think victory has defeated you, it hasn't, because we're here to talk about it, to speak about it a little bit more in depth, and talk about some anti-patterns, some common mistakes, some oversights. So the way we start off this is like with every episode, with the question. The question of the day is something related to the topic. So when it comes to this, you discover an unauthorized API call. What's your first CLI command? And feel free to put 1, 2, 3, or 4 in the chat, corresponding to the action that you would take. But for right this second and moment, I hand it over to Russ. Where are you going?
So I would go look up events, just because I think that that's probably where I'm going to find the most data that I can pivot off of and kind of start my investigation. I don't think there's really anything wrong with list users get findings. I think AWS logs tail is maybe a little bit late at that point, but yeah, I would say look up events for me. But I don't think there's necessarily a wrong answer here.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is there's no wrong answer. It's based on what is your organization's approach to, one, IR, but two, just kind of your understanding of what services you have enabled. Because if you do AWS guard duty get findings and you don't have guard duty enabled, then it's not going to work out the best way, because you're trying to figure out what is happening. Where did that unauthorized API call come from? Russ mentioned, hey, log tails. And Russ also mentioned saying hello to Victor, Victor, Victor. But one of the things that you want to look at is what is the service doing and how am I trying to retrieve said information? So if the log entries are recorded, CloudWatch logs, okay, how can we kind of stream that a little bit faster? But that begs the question of, all right, what is fast when it comes to your operations? How do we get to the point where we're optimized to a way where, hey, I started out thinking I knew about the command line, but how was I molded by the command line? And that's where we start to go in understanding some of the advantages of the command line, right? So when you think about how you can transform your journey, the main part to kind of start with is the first step of just understanding what the command line is and how it can kind of enable security through scripted, documented, and repeatable steps that ensure, I would say, perfected consistency, because you've pressed enter a couple of times and kind of perfected it through it either working or not working to do what you wanted to do, right? Russ has been there. I've been there. And that's part of the original trial and error. That's why we have the sandbox environments within your AWS organizations. Little plug there for people who more use the sandbox OU. Just because sometimes you rush into non-prod, right? And what I mean by that is when you think of your development lifecycle, often you see companies, organizations, they try to kind of get to the point of, okay, we're going to push this right away. And sometimes in order to do that, they say, hey, just deploy via the console and we'll come back and automate it later. And does that later ever come? Well, partially, right? When they're trying to revert all the stuff that they did through the console access, right? Because one of the things to realize that when you're trying to eliminate human error, especially in repetitive tasks, it's best to have some type of mechanism that you can repeatedly do. So every CLI command, for instance, creates a implicit audit, I would say, record that can be logged and reviewed, right? And what does that do? It helps up the speed. It boosts it a little bit, right? Because when you understand the basic, I would say, security command structure, you start to understand, okay, what is the syntax that I'm supposed to know? How can I manipulate the output? Because you notice when individuals get deep into the command line, they say, just give me the data. Just give me, because they start to see through it, right? We spoke about the transparent world last week where I can see through everything and kind of get there. Now, the way to take it and understand it within the command line is getting to a point where, hey, I can take in all this information, filter it, and manipulate it based on what I need to do, right? So I'm sure you've seen this before, Russ, as well. When you're trying to go through an incident or something along those lines, you have so much information coming in. Then you're like, okay, how can I best filter this, right? And you probably have some type of method like, oh, let me just write something for this really quick, right? So that, I think that would be one of your approaches, right? Is just I'll just command line or script it.
Yep.
Yeah. So
definitely.
Yeah, it's one of those things that it becomes a go-to because you can kind of quiet the noise by becoming the noise, right? Right.
Well, yeah, it's also like bringing. I was gonna say bringing the noise. I was like, I can't do that. But it's bringing back only the noise that you want. Lets you go through the noise and figure out what actual sounds you need. So
exactly. And part of the reason why we always suggest kind of taking that step back, right, and taking a look at, hey, you're doing this in a sandbox, but the next stop, the last stop, depending on how you look at it, is how do I stop other people from doing this, whether they're internal or external? And that's when you start to get into IAM roles and how permissions are handled, how the security groups handled, how are log queries stopped from being handled. The reason why I went in that order is because, hey, if you have something that it's like, oh, they just have read-only access. Well, read-only access is kind of a big thing, because now they can start to query based on their understanding of your organization, and they just can keep building out a blueprint. So starting to get to a point of, hey, I understand the syntax. Now I understand how I have to limit, because somebody else can do this command that I just did. Now you start to see how this can affect your entire environment. So there's a lot of administrative guidance within the AWS CLI configurations, the documentations, all those kind of things. But the main thing is understanding, one, why you're doing it, and then two, why you have to protect it. Because what we often see is this question that is posed is like, okay, why do you get that sense of security? I would say security anxiety. It's just like, there's something I have to change. There's something going on in my environment. Well, I would say, let's take a poll, right? It's an interesting concept, right? So if we go back to our polls, right? What breaks your security spirit? Is it access key rotations, IAM permissions, resource tagging, compliance checks? Russ, which one breaks your security spirit?
Access key rotation. And it's not even close.
I felt all of that.
Yeah. It can absolutely be automated, but it's just the lack of access key rotation that breaks my security spirit.
Yeah. So is it because it's something that can be easily implemented, but if it's not, it can be something that's so detrimental to time, effort, cost, all of that?
Yes, that's exactly why. That's exactly why. It is the number one thing that my team sees as an incident is the exposure of long-term credential keys. So, or credentials and long-term credentials in general, but specifically access keys. That is the one that gets people the most.
Yeah. And I think part of that is also just kind of underestimating like how long something's going to be in place. Because when you're trying to move fast, as we see some customers do, what they say is, oh, this is just temporary. This is just for Q4, right? And then we're going to switch to a different system. Oh, we're just doing a lift and shift. And after that, we're going to do a whole modernization effort. But that modernization effort can take a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years to align all the stakeholders. And in that time, the keys, they're still there. They're not being rotated. Depending on kind of your compliance checks is kind of the only driving factor sometimes. And if you're within a vertical that doesn't have those particular like PCI, hey, we're about to be audited checks, then that can raise some flags, right? So I think part of the conversation is starting to get to that understanding of why you have these different pieces in play. For me, kind of what breaks my security spirit is usually it's resource tagging, right? The reason I say is resource tagging is because when I do a lot of tabletops, that's one of the things is just speaking about, okay, who owns the resource? And then it's ... Well, so how do you know what that resource is doing? Well, we'd have to log in and see what it's doing. Well, when's the last time you logged in? 2 years ago. Okay. Yeah. So those are the kind of things that you start to get to. But it all goes back to understanding the pieces of the puzzle, right? So Victor says a couple things like maybe cloud. Right? I don't know why Zoidberg popped into my head for that. Maybe cloud.
Maybe. Why not Zoidberg?
So, Victor, we always appreciate you joining in. And one of the items that we start to get into is back to that original conversation of the console versus CLI, right? So what we did, and let's go off the rails a little bit, and let me ask the you always had Zoidberg. I appreciate that, Jeff. So if I ask good old Amazon Q a couple of questions, particular around console versus CLI, let us kind of delve into that a little bit. So we just created a quick script here, and let me make this a little bit more easier for everyone to read. So when we start to get into understanding the context of, hey, console versus CLI, well, part of it gets into the conversation of, do we know the advantages? So if we take this simple Python script that we created that has Lambda, now you can take something that would take maybe 50 clicks across multiple AWS screens.
Or more.
A couple, right? It's funny because it wrote 20. I was like, no, it's more 50 depending on what you're doing. And you have to have the manual page navigation. You have to have the individual user MFA checks depending on your security posture. This is a lot of time and effort to do something, opposed to having maybe one function. And this is where this Lambda comes into play, right? So if you take something like, hey, let's generate something in the console, a security report. Okay, how do we do that? Well, we just did, right? This is where it starts to get fun, right? Because you start to notice, okay, what is this exactly doing? What is this CLI magic? I love sometimes when you're going through and just leveraging Q, where it's just like CLI magic. Yes, you know exactly my mindset. How to do something like this, right? How to get MFA report for some users, right, that are accessing. All these kind of things are what we're trying to achieve, right? For instance, one of the common security items is, hey, can we find all the security groups with quad zeros? This couldn't be a task that takes a little bit, right? Depending on your organizational scale. Let's think about this. If you are an organization that has multiple units, you have multiple accounts, and you only have one or two administrators, that's usually the formula that we see happen, where it's, hey, who manages security groups? Oh, the networking team. Okay, who's on the network team? Oh, it's just Bob. We'll use Bob as a random name, right? Okay, it's just Bob, and Bob gets 100 requests. Well, it starts taking shortcuts, and then maybe, let's just open this, we'll close it out. So now, using this Lambda function, what we can do is essentially automate this process of finding out during an audit scenario or something along those lines of what exactly is happening. And then eventually what we can do. Yeah, right? And it's the I was going to say the evil version of Bob. It's Bob spelled backwards. So the security report of the comprehensive variety can be created as well based on all these things we were just speaking about, right? And the important takeaway is not necessarily getting to the tidbits of what's going into this Python, but it's I was going to say the feeling, but the understanding of how you can optimize, because this 93 lines is essentially probably a week's work of somebody's time that has, one, AWS knowledge, but two, the knowledge of the environment itself to gather, and three, permissions, hopefully, that they have to gather if they're not belonging to these different areas. So this is the pieces that we're trying to get back, right? Time and effort, little things like that. But Russ, what comes to mind when you think of like the essential security operation side of this?
What doesn't come to mind? I would say that security operations, I would start off with, let's say, real-time security monitoring, right? because that's what I do and that's what I focus on is TDIR. So real-time security monitoring, multiple ways to do that. I think the most well-known is guard duty. So how can you use guard duty on the command line instead of in the console? Because when you go in the console, you're going to see every single guard duty that has ever happened in your account. And that's only one account. So how do you do things like that? So using, commands like your AWS guard duty list findings, that we showed earlier. Your list findings is going to be, a simple example, but, just doing the list findings, from the command line and being able to switch to a new service like Security Hub, to get findings, or using AWS Security get findings. You're saving yourself that much time by just being able to, hit in some simple commands and get the answers that you need right on your screen instantly, instead of going through, clicking on different things, going to different services, navigating different pages. It's just too much for a human to do, especially while you're, for example, running down a possible incident. The security console or your console is going to be that kind of window into the account or organization, at scale. So yeah, then there's different other integrations as well. You can use CloudWatch, for example, AWS CloudWatch. You can get metrics, statistics, or whatever that is that you're looking to do, which will just get those security metrics that you want to monitor. That could be set up as an ongoing thing, so that way it's getting those metrics in like a real-time formatting. And then, of course, I have to talk about CloudTrail because, CloudTrail is what I use as my primary tool, so for investigation. So, this one, AWS CloudTrail, look up events. And just like that, you have guard duty list findings, AWS Security Hub get findings, AWS CloudWatch get metrics statistics, and AWS CloudTrail look up events. Now you have 4 different queries that you were able to knock out as quick as it takes to type them up. And instead of having to go through every single console page, every service page, you get to the home screen and then you got to click dashboard. All that stuff, does take up a lot of time, especially if you have to do it for multiple accounts. It's a process. So this way you can do it all, write it all up. You could do it all in one script like Tristan just showed you. So that way, having these things running and having this set up takes a lot less time in general, but just comparatively, saving yourself the time, being able to do this repeatedly. So saying, hey, here's our real-time security monitoring report, like we just saw with Tristan. And you can do that every week. Boom, just like that, instantly run, get your responses, get your report, find out what's going on in your environment. And then you can use them for, automating incident response. For example, doing things like automatically isolating compromised resources. It wouldn't be automatic because you'd be actually typing up the command, but you can do that. Changing the security group rules so that way no one can access it, which would be AWS EC2 revoke security group ingress. And so you can do things like that. You can gather security telemetry using the AWS config service. I think it's get resource config history. So a lot of these things that you can kind of add into a bigger script. So that way you can have this all ready to go when you do determine that, hey, that guard duty finding, was a true positive, say, for example, we have to, stop an EC2 instance because they're using it for crypto mining. So we're able to just use a command, AWS EC2 stop instances. You're saving yourself not only time, but also money because that was a crypto mining event. So every single second or millisecond that it's still running, that's additional spend that the attacker was able to use on the account. So a lot of different things that you can do as far as the automated incident response tasks. You can even use CloudTrail to automate a timeline for that incident. There's the AWS CloudTrail lookup events, but you can add some flags and filters to get the appropriate information, finding malicious instead of your routine everyday activity. That's kind of how you can automate those processes just through the command line. Doesn't have to be anything super crazy or a big long script. Simplicity running in the command line, allowing us to be a little bit quicker, be a little bit more efficient with our time and resources. And then, as Tristan alluded to earlier, we also have assessments or compliance requirements. And ideally, I don't know about you, but if I'm going through an audit, I would like that to be done as quick as possible. So I'm definitely going to go and use command line scripts or command line commands for compliance. So running a compliance check for AWS config service, right? You can describe compliance by config rule. So depending on what your environment looks like, you can bring up all of your compliance rules and not having to do it manually. Then using commands like access analyzer list findings to be able to audit your IAM permissions, which is something that you definitely need to be doing regularly. Not for nothing, but IAM is a big thing in security for the cloud, because can't do anything without authorization or access, and IAM is the way to get it. So checking your resource configurations, if you have been able to tell, it's a lot of list and get, lots of just pulling that information for you. So if you want the config rules, you have a command for that. IAM access analyzer, config for resource configurations, security hub. You could do 4 short commands and have an entire compliance report ready and ready to be sent off. So there's definitely a lot of power and flexibility with the command line and being able to do more than just basic ClickOps. And I don't call it basic because it's not basic, but it could be much easier done through the command line. And then there's also we have our workflows built for operational security. So there's different things that you can track, like using looking and tracking the security metrics in CloudWatch. It's a simple command, AWS CloudWatch, put dashboard. And then we have alerting mechanisms like SNS, incident response procedures. So you can use like Systems Manager to automate your response, or even just documenting the security events. You can do that using CloudTrail. And also you can, create a log for CLI actions, which I also recommend doing, because that is something that, if you're able to do, then others are able to do, and therefore you need to be monitoring it. So there's a lot of different workflows, dashboards, reports, and things that can be automated and done in such an easier, quicker response, be able to get you all of that information. I'm sure most of the people watching have, gotten their hands on, the terminal or command line in Windows or PowerShell. You think of it the same way, where you have that level of power and flexibility to be able to do those things right from the command line using a script or simple string of commands. Really increases your abilities.
Yeah, and the one piece that we always say as advice is don't be afraid of the command line. I need to take a drink for my voice, but essentially what we're trying to get to is, hey, if you're looking at something like Bodo 3, hey, there's a couple of examples that you can dive into just to get a little bit more familiar with. So Russ was mentioning stuff like, hey, CloudWatch. Hey, how can I just create some alarms within CloudWatch? Well, if you go to the documentation, you kind of see a couple of pieces of code that you can leverage, right? So list alarms with insufficient data, right? Essentially, you're like, okay, how do I get some of this information? And this is where the command line really comes into play, because you are trying to go towards the overarching, right? So you want the overall journey, but the journey starts at, I would say, depending on how you look at it, the Adventurers Guild, something along those lines, or I'm trying to do fantasy, right? Where's your starting place? Well, you have to start by getting the information on the quest, figuring out your name, all those kind of things. That's where the command line is, right? It's giving you the information so you can take it on your quest. And what does your quest end up being? Well, this entire script of saying, hey, I just want to get utilization for something, right? I know this metric, this alarm is going to kick off. How do I do that? Well, sometimes it takes a little bit, right? Not going to lie, because you have to get used to it, especially if you weren't born in the command line. You're just kind of molded by it. And how do you get molded by it? Well, you kind of start taking it step by step. The other way that you can take it is by learning about Legends Past, right? Of the side quest variety. So, as always, we start side quests with a little bit of theme music going along with today's question of the day, right? This would be my tavern music as we start another side quest. So as we tell a tale as old as time, let's think of what we can speak about. Well, what we can speak about is, hey, maybe we have a major enterprise, and that enterprise is called maybe Gotham Security. We'll go with that. It's a theme, right? So maybe traditionally they use the CLI security practices, but maybe their traditional approach to the CLI has become not the path for them for protecting against modern threats. Maybe their infrastructure spans across multiple regions, EMEA, the Americas, so on and so forth. Well, maybe each developed different command line tool and security practices for each of the regions because there's different approaches. Well, if you have this scenario, then what you have to do is you have to start to think about maintaining legacy credentials. You have to start thinking of, hey, what are the iron roles over here versus over there? Well, when you think of the modern cloud application, you start to think of, hey, we're using a CLI, but are we efficient in this path? Well, on today's side quest, where we dive into the customer story, let's take a little bit of a deeper dive into this. And the best way to do so within this legend is pulling up the side quest board. And the side quest board is a visualization of this customer story. So if we have said board up, we think of it more along this structure where let us take our authenticated user and a little bit ahead of our unauthenticated group of users over here. So the path that they're trying to carve out is, how do I safely navigate the CLI to my AWS environment to do something? Well, I think there's a simple method for this, right? We kind of just use a Lambda, end credit scene, roll the credits. Right? It's like, oh, what is that really? Right? Because when you think of the CLI, how is this user that's authenticated accessing this? Is there a role? Is there permissions? Is there VPN? Is there zero trust using something like ABA? See last week's episode, which is in the chat. But Russ, when you think of the CLI, what kind of security challenges do you think customers face based on your experience?
I would say credential management, I think, is going to be the number one, or access management in general. Yeah.
It fits the scenario, because especially if we look at something like this, is usually the case. What you see is you have somebody who's unauthenticated, maybe trying to leverage this Lambda function in order to maybe have some type of credential upgrades, right? You see upgrade, and you're it's like, oh, we don't want that today, right? Yeah, and Victor says it's credential hygiene, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I would say hygiene because it's kind of the wish that wasn't there when something happens, right? Because when you start to get to it, that's what usually happens, is there might be access to something that somebody takes advantage of. If you think of the attack surface within your environment, usually it comes to, hey, how do I stop this Lambda from granting access? Because maybe that's what this Lambda function was in particular doing. Maybe it was to elevate permissions. Because what you see sometimes is the disconnect. And if we take that step back and think about our Gotham securities, they have a multi-region CLI authentication. They have cross-account access patterns. They have dynamic security groups, probably, because this is across the world. They're global. So now, what happens when there's failover? What happens when they have legacy command line integrations? Well, it's just creating different attack potential vectors. So now somebody maybe leaves the company and, hey, this unauthenticated user can take advantage of that, because now they're assuming the role that this user had, or plain old logging right in with that user. And now they can use this Lambda to maybe spin up something within the environment, or just elevate their own access, depending on how they're structured. So when you think of managing an enterprise-wide security, what is the approach that you think of, Russ, based on today's episode?
Ooh, based on today's episode, I'm going to say that maybe using access keys is not the right way to authenticate into the environment.
Yeah,
that sounds dangerous.
For the holiday, the holiday party, I'm going to send you a box, and inside that box is just going to be a key. It's going to be your first access key.
Yep, I'm going to hang it up right behind me.
Yeah. So I think that's part of it, right? It's the automation first, right? Let's automate access keys away, right? So if that's what Russ is feeling, then the solution starts to become a little bit clearer. Because if we're moving towards that as our North Star of, hey, we want this Lambda here, but everything else we want to automate first as well, including access keys. Well, now we can start thinking about advanced control implementations, right? So how do we take our global organization and maybe put AWS orgs somewhere in there so we can have service control policy, so we can have a multi-account CLI architecture, centralized command structure, little things like that. So we can take that dynamic approach to growing our environment. And with this automation framework, we start to talk about CI/CD and the pipelines. And our favorite thing that goes with pipelines, security tooling. But that's a side quest. That's an episode for another day. that falls into the security improvements and growth, right? Is okay, we have a pipe. How are we securing said pipeline? And that's really where you kind of want to take that second to jump back, right? Just with the board right here, and then it's gone, right? That's how quick something can happen and something can occur if you don't have the proper mechanisms in place, right? And if you don't have the proper mechanisms, sometimes you hear a different type of music. That's your theme music. You hear the sad music, right? You hear the same song, little by little. It might be dramatic, or it might be a little bit of, how come we did that? And that's where you kind of jump back out to it, right? And that's where we usually like to take the pause game button and hit the Zach Morris timeout, as we call it, as we start to think about these different items. So the question is, hey, when you think of your environment from a security automation foundational piece, do you feel in charge? Well, that is a good question, because are you building security focused scripts within your environment? Are you tailoring them to your AWS security operations? Because the scripts of on-prem may not be applicable to the AWS cloud. And spoilers, they're probably not, because things change. The foundations of how you build change. Because when you look at something like the well-architected framework, well, all these steps are there for a reason. And that reason is, hey, this is how it's structured. There's a shared responsibility model. There's the of the cloud and the in the cloud. So when it comes to, hey, in the cloud, what are you doing? Right? And it's a question, because it's like, what are you doing within here, right? Why did you migrate to the cloud in the first place? Well, it's usually to scale your operations. It's better tooling or something on optimizations, things like that. So when you keep that same mindset as you move over and start to invest into some scripting, some logging and monitoring, some advanced and automated security checks, so that you get to a place where, hey, your security practitioners say, I'm somewhat of a security professional ourselves, because they get to a point where, hey, I have CloudWatch events and EventBridge, that we start to get to a point where, hey, maybe we think of the compliance validations within our organization that tie to those security checks. So when we have security scans, when we have those validations, when we have our resources being monitored, there's alerts, and there's more alerts. And those alerts are kind of curated. And how do they get curated? Well, by using the command line. So you see how everything came full circle, because it's an important part, reporting and metrics, right? Right? Yeah, you see the circle. And what is also circle? Automation. So we're having fun with it, but it's for a specific reason of, hey, when you start to adopt the command line, you start to figure out the different pieces that go into everything. You start to build your architecture a certain way. And you start to think of, hey, when I get to, hey, my advanced security knowledge, right? No, that's not something somebody says, right? It's like, I have advanced security. No, it's, I have steps that I've taken piece by piece, brick by brick, that we start to, build within our environment. And we also learn from other people's security pitfalls. That's the important part. And Russ alluded to a couple items later. So I'm going to throw the football back to Russ, because, hey, what are some of those security pitfalls that you see?
Yeah, so I do see a couple security pitfalls. I'm going to go ahead and deal with the credential management issues because of who I am as a person. So I'm going to go over some of the, let's call them pitfalls, but things that that will land you a trip to visiting me. So long-live access keys. These are credentials that do not expire. So access keys. Access keys will stay open forever. So, if you go through your list, I don't know, maybe AWS IAM list access keys, and you see that there are some from like 2017, it's time to update your hygiene, security hygiene in general. But those are huge risks. For example, you were talking about people leaving the company, stuff like that. They still have access to those credentials. You have a public key and a private key, and that's going to allow you to log into the CLI. So you can use things like Bodo, like you were talking about before, which is the CLI development kit. I don't think we went over that, but instead of the software development kit, it is the command line development kit, the CDK. And so they will have access to that even after they leave the company. And people do check absolutely to see whether their access was turned off or not. Ask me how I know, because I see it all the time. People, or not people, but in general, there's a lot that can be maybe glossed over. Oh, I'm using GitHub, I trust GitHub, even though you can absolutely see credentials from, I don't know, maybe accessing deleted fork data or accessing, deleted repo data, for example. And so a lot of these credentials can be picked up. I know that like Trufflehog will look through basically everything to be able to find AWS credentials. So, it's a reason why you would like to mitigate that risk as much as possible by using temporary or short-lived credentials like tokens. STS, will, allow you to, what's the word I'm looking for? Not grant a token. What's the word I'm looking for?
Assume?
Yeah, let's go. It'll allow you to assume and start that session to be able to access your environment without actually having to use a credential that never expires. So there's a lot to be said about that. And when you do have credentials that are long-lived, there are absolutely use cases where you need maybe an access key or something like that. But you still have to rotate those credentials. Just because you have the need or the use case doesn't mean that you're like, well, it's good, done. You still have to rotate those, make sure that they're not sitting there for 5 years, because then that's when you run into an issue where someone looked up some of your old deleted repo data or deleted fork data, and then boom, that 5-year-old credential is now exposed, and you're going to have an issue on your hands. And so that's something that can absolutely be done through the command line and automated. Just create access key. It's not like the commands are super complicated. There's usually some sort of list or create or put or get, and then the actual resource that you're trying to do. So for example, like, hard coding credentials, you don't want to do that. So you're looking at Secrets Manager. You go to AWS Secrets Manager, get secret value, and boom, there you go. You have your secret. And also there's some improper storage things. Don't store your credentials in, I don't know, plain text in one of your buckets. And also there's named CLI profiles, which is a best practice to be able to actually be able to track those profiles. So that way, if you are monitoring regularly for use, you'll see that sort of thing and hopefully be able to narrow down the specific profile and kind of key into where or what that happened. And then there are some other issues like permission problems. There's overly permissive roles or overly permissive NACLs and security groups. Showed you an example of that earlier. Resource level access, which is a good one, and cross account issues, which can take shape in various ways. But multi-account setups can be a challenge. So you really have to be on top of your AWS organizations and your service control policies.
And your roles, just like CB mentioned, right? We don't have users within my company. We have a role that we sign in with AWS SSO login, right? So this is usually the best practice, is not to have any user accounts within your AWS account itself, right? There should be roles. and some centralized management and governance, right? Because
Yeah.
when you get to it, the only way I can see a user is probably like a break glass user, but then that break glass user would assume a role. So yeah, those couple of items, right? And
they're very small number
Yeah.
of use cases, like extremely small. And if you're asking yourself, do I really need users, or can I switch over to temporary credentials? That's not a question anymore. If you don't know, then go ahead and switch over. Don't use credentials.
It's like root. It's like what are the good uses for root, right? Don't use root on a daily basis. It's like finite, right? But I think part of that is just knowing, right? And kind of, as we like to say, building our aura up, right? And going on knowledge quest to do so. But if we were specifically catering it to the command line, I would say it's more of the command line chronicles that we would go to, right? If you're a security guardian, what is your tail? And the tail is simple. It is getting to a place where, hey, do I understand security IAM best practices? Well, that's a question you ask yourself when you're a security explorer. This is when you're a L100, right? It's like, hey, what do I need to know? Well, all these items, right? Just a short list that has more lists inside of those lists because you're exploring. You're starting to have that energy behind you, right? So that eventually when you get to something like, hey, okay, what is some CLI commands? What is this security hub item page that we just pulled up to? These are questions that you start to ask yourself as you're exploring. Because when you explore, you start to think, okay, where are things being generated? And a lot of places end up in CloudTrail. But I digress the amount of places that and times, as Russ has probably spent hours and hours within CloudTrail, right? So you start to get to that point. And eventually you level up. You see the pop-up achievement come up and you say, hey, I'm somewhat of a security specialist myself because I know how to go through the events. I know how to kind of look at, hey, what do these available commands do? Okay, I'll just click on it and I start to go. You start to understand the syntax, which is an important part of the puzzle, right? That's half of getting where you need to go. Till eventually you get to a place where I start to think about Lambda. I start to think about alarming when something occurs within the environment. And that's how eventually you start to level up to a security strategist level. This is the L300, right? And I think part of that is, hey, now I'm looking at the IAM documentation a little bit differently. I'm thinking about it a little bit differently. Why is that? Because I'm strategically learning how to mature my organization, my environment. And the way you do that is through concepts as simple as least privilege, and then kind of growing that one XP point at a time, because every XP point helps you to level up not only your environment, but yourself and your knowledge and maybe your title. And what is your title? Well, I would say do a get command in the command line and see what it comes back with. But if you don't have time for that, you can always do something else that takes a little bit more of, I would say, a lo-fi approach. And what is that, Russ? What is that lo-fi approach?
Create an incident response plan.
Yes. Put on the music, put on your theme song of the day, and kind of
just type it out.
Exactly.
Get working.
Right? You see how we come full circle because automation. So until next time, have a great day. Happy Monday. Take care.
Have a good week.